Hey guys, Mike here with EBR, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're taking a look at a bike like we always do, and that's the new Lectric XPeak 2.0. But as you can see, we're not outside, there's no bike behind me like you usually see, and that's because Lectric invited myself and some others out to check out at a media day event the new XPeak 2.0, and they also let us spend some time riding these for a few hours out in the Arizona desert, which was a lot of fun. And so I've got some good initial impressions because this bike did something kind of unique that you don't see often. So they bumped up almost every spec. It's got a better frame, it's got a bigger battery, it's got more range, it's got improvements to the motor, the braking, a whole lot more. And somehow in 2024, they found a way to add more to it while keeping it the exact same price at $13.99. So that's not something we see every day, and it's something I'm excited to share with you guys. So stick around and let's take a deep dive into the new Lectric XPeak 2.0. All right guys, so the new XPeak 2.0 is a class 1, 2, or 3 e-bike that you can adjust in the display, as well as the price, like I said in the intro, it still remains at $13.99, which is fairly impressive considering in today's economy, it feels like everything got more expensive and nothing got better, where in this case, it did not get more expensive and almost everything on it got better, so that's a pretty good nod to Lectric as a brand in general. Now this is a fat tire e-bike, so this is going to be something you can do a little bit of anything with, everything from commuting, it's got a headlight, taillight, rear rack, all the way up to off-road trails with its RST Renegade front suspension fork and big fat knobby tires. Now UL certifications and safety certifications, this bike has the electrical system on the entire bike is 2849 certified, and the battery itself is UL 2271 certified, which is always nice to see, especially on bikes at the lower price point. Now they say this bike weighs 75 pounds and the battery about 10.5 pounds, making the bike without the battery about 64.5. That's my public school math working right there. Now when it comes to colors, there are two color options. They have a fog gray, which is like a dark metallic gray, or a stratus white, which is a, well, as you guessed, white. And both of those are in a glossy paint combination or a glossy paint finish. And they only come in one frame size. Now that frame size will fit a pretty wide range from 5'4" up to 6'4", but as far as the two colors in one frame size, that's the only options on this bike, with the exception that you can pick between a high step model, like I got to test and you're probably seeing on the screen now, or a step through model. While I didn't get to ride that one, they do have it, and generally speaking, that should be probably a wider fit range to more riders who want kind of a lower step through height and an easier way to get on and off the bike. So it's nice that they have that option as well. So when it comes to tires, well, it's a fat tire bike, so we've got nice big wide 4-inch tires. Now they're made, at least on the one I demoed at the media day event, those were Chow Yang tires with knobby treads on them, kind of an all-terrain tire, sized at 26 inches by 4 inches wide with some puncture protection. And I think the one I rode had some reflective stripes on the side for just some visibility at night. Now, the wheels themselves, as you can guess, 26 inches, alloy wheels, and they do fit a 4-inch wide tire. Now, when it comes to accessories and mounting points, the bike had a rear rack on my demo model. I don't know if that will be included standard as an optional upgrade or a free upgrade or a free accessory, but they do have a rear rack for it. I have a suspicion it's going to be included for free with the bike because the taillight on the demo bike I had was wired into that rear rack or up against it, so I don't see how they would sell it without that, but that's just me speculating. Now, when it comes to optional accessories, I assume it's going to have all the regulars, things like fenders, front rack, rear rack, cell phone holders, all the typical accessories you see from e-bike companies. When it comes to mounting points though, so you can kit it the way you want, it's got quite a few. So like I said, on the bike I rode, there was a rear rack with an integrated light. But if you want to add things like fenders, you have mounting points on both wheels for those, as well as 3 bosses on the down tube and 2 bosses on the seat tube, giving you really several options to kind of kit the bike out the way you see fit. Now, as far as lighting goes, it comes standard with a larger front LED headlight. I don't know the brightness on it, they haven't released that yet, but it is brighter and larger than the last edition XPeak. Now the taillight, like I said, was integrated into the rear rack, leading me to believe you'll probably get the rear rack with the bike, but don't quote me on that. And aside from that, it's got everything you need for a little bit of light commuting with the rear rack and front and rear headlights, as well as the ability to take it off-road with the larger tires. All right, so when it comes to the motor and battery, that's where we start to see some of these features and upgrades to this new 2.0 model start to shine on this bike. So the motor itself is still a rear hub 750 watt motor, but this time around, they gave it peaking wattage of 1,310 watts, 85 newton meters of torque, but most importantly, a torque sensor with the PWR Plus programming, which essentially kind of raises the floor and uses a little bit of cadence sensor technology along with the torque sensor to effectively give you power as soon as you start rotating the pedals, but really dialing that power in to match your effort once you start really applying torque and pressure and speed to the pedals. It'll kind of gauge what you're doing and give you back what you're requesting for ultimately a powerful, peppy, and kind of somewhat intuitive riding experience that really just felt fun and easy to blast through the Arizona desert on. I definitely had a good time out there, and the bike felt pretty strong even on some steep inclines with some very loose, chunky rock that the barren Arizona desert trails have to offer. Now, the bike has 5 levels of PAS or pedal assistance, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, and it gets gradually stronger in between. Now, when it comes to the controller, there is a 24 amp controller, and the battery on this is a 48 volt standard battery that has a 15 amp hour, 720 watt hour total juice package, but you can opt for an upgraded version of that, which will be a 20 amp hour, 48 volt battery, giving you 960 watt hours, one of the largest in the fat tire e-bike class, especially at this price point. And at the standard level, that 15 amp hour I first talked about at 720 watts, that's actually a step up from the standard version of the 1.0 version, which came with 672 watt hours. So right off the bat, the motor's got a torque sensor increase, and the battery has a watt hour and range increase, which is very cool to see. Now, when it comes to range numbers, Lectric has not released specific range numbers, but I do have the XPeak 1.0 here in my possession, and that one I got 59 miles at the low PAS level. Now, this time around, I can still use some of my public school math and try to figure out what we'll get this time. With 720 watt hours, or essentially 50 more watt hours, we can expect that number to creep somewhere up into the 60s. And with the 20 amp version with 960 watt hours, that should take us effectively somewhere into the 80-mile range, which on a fat tire bike at 75 pounds is super cool. So when it comes to components on the new XPeak 2.0, I'm gonna start with the frame. Not a traditional component per se, but it definitely matters here. So looking at the frame, they didn't release the specifics, but I can tell you what I saw and felt, and that is, at first glance, it has a larger, beefier just size to it. It looks like it's got a more stout frame. Now, largely that's going to be due to being able to put a larger battery into the frame. But on top of that, when I rode the bike, it felt much stiffer than the 1.0 version. And I don't know if any of you got to ride that 1.0 version, but it did have more of a flexy feel on the frame, especially on the step-through model. And it was nice to see and even feel that this new frame not only had some softer lines on the corners and even a new color, but most importantly, felt stiffer and more responsive out on the trail, which is even to me, probably the most important part there. Now, moving on from the frame, the component lineup kind of starting back at the drivetrain. Previously, it had a 7-speed Shimano on it with a kind of small range cassette in the rear, but they've kind of beefed that up as well. Now we've got an 8-speed Shimano drivetrain with a larger or wider range rear cassette that is 11 to 34 tooth rear cassette. Now up front, you've got a 46 tooth chainring mated to 170 millimeter crank arms and the Lectric flat alloy pedals that have raised studs for traction, as well as some reflectors for visibility. But even cooler than that, they have quick release detachments so you can pop them on and off as needed, which I never knew I wanted, but once I played with them on these bikes, I thought it was kind of cool. So when it comes to braking, the previous bike had 180 millimeter rotors with 2-piston calipers front and back. Now we're still getting hydraulic disc brakes on the XPeak 2.0, but this time around they went with a more kind of MTB style setup where they put a 203 millimeter rotor up front with a 180 millimeter rotor in the back. And ultimately what that does is just give you better stopping power and more control, especially off-road, which my own personal mountain bike is set up in a very similar fashion, and it was cool to see that they gave that nod to the XPeak 2.0. Now when it comes to suspension, this is a hardtail design, so you've got no suspension in the rear with a front suspension fork, well, up front. Now they did something that's been impressive on the XP 1.0, XPeak 1.0, and this XPeak 2.0, and that is a RST Renegade fork. Now at first glance that may not sound like a very big deal, but when you dig a little deeper and just Google an RST Renegade fork, it's got a $400 price tag. Mind you, this is a $13.99 bike. So a lot of value in that front fork, plus it's coming from a brand that's got a reputation, some reliability, some service, things you can look up online and work with the shock, service the shock, which is really nice to see over the more traditional unbranded coil forks we see at this price point. It's got a lockout feature, it's got through axle support and 80 millimeters of travel. So all in all, just a very cool upgrade. And this time around, they kept the RST Renegade fork, but this time they got black stanchions, which is a very subtle change and it really does nothing to performance. But in my opinion, it just looks a little better than the steel or chrome looking stanchions. Call me petty, but I just like that look better. Now up in the cockpit, we do have a pretty traditional MTB style flat bar with a slight rise, maybe 15-20 degrees. I don't know the actual geo numbers on it. And it's fairly wide. I'd say it's about that 720 to 760 range, although I don't know off the top of my head. And it's got a stubby fixed stem, a pretty true MTB style cockpit. Now on either end, you've got lock-on rubber grips that have good feeling to them, and thankfully they're lock-on so they won't slip or pull off over time. Now one of the best parts about the cockpit this time around is, and it applies back to this drivetrain, is when they beefed up this drivetrain, on the old model, they had a 7-speed over-the-bar, kind of clunky Shimano index push shifter that I didn't find very intuitive, and I often would have to go look for it when I would shift. It's just not a normal placement. But on this XPeak 2.0, they did go, thank you, with under-the-bar shifters, trigger shifter styles that we're all familiar with, at least if you ride mountain bikes or even hybrid commuters have those. It's just a nice, more efficient, more intuitive way to shift without looking. It looks cleaner in the cockpit. And frankly, I'm glad to see the Shimano over-the-bar shifters go. Now in the center, you've got a new display. Over on the left-hand side, you have your PAS and power buttons. And ultimately, that's it. You've got your hydraulic disc brake levers on both ends. And other than that, it's a very clean cockpit. The wiring is pretty typical electric. They're all bound up together from the handlebar and then routed ultimately down into the down tube of the frame. Not too messy, but not super clean like a more high-end bike. It's pretty much what you'd expect at that level. So when it comes to that display I just mentioned, it is another area they gave us a spec bump. So last time we had a duotone LCD display that had kind of a almost like old school computer looking font on it. There was nothing wrong with it. It worked effectively. I never had any issues with it. But this time around, we got a cleaner, nicer looking, more modern looking, full color display that's water resistant. It's got all your basic data like speed, odometer, battery levels, things like that. But it's also got some advanced settings you can go into and adjust those class settings, like changing it between class 1, 2, and 3, as well as some other small settings you can tweak. And in general, it just looks better, it's cleaner layout, and it's got some other cool features that I think you guys will appreciate, things like USB charging ports on it so you can charge your phone while you're riding, and it has brightness adjustability that you can kind of play with. But I found it has good contrast, and even in that direct Arizona sunlight, I found it no problem to see the display. And still, Lectric does not have any app connectivity for any of their bikes, so this did not miss out on app connectivity. Lectric in general just doesn't offer app service with their bikes. All right guys, so that is the new Lectric XPeak 2.0. It's going to be a bike that, again, it's just surprising they were able to add all these extra features, and let's just kind of run through some of those. So we've got the motor with a torque sensor now, we've got improved braking with a larger 203 front rotor, we have larger battery options and a standard battery option that is even more power and range than the old one, as well as a new color display that's IP65 rated from water and dust resistance, as well as a stiffer and more responsive frame that was really, in my opinion, probably the most important aspect that they did fix this time around. So I really think Lectric just did a very good job all around of putting together a ton of value, improved riding quality, improved performance, and even that $400 front RST Renegade fork. It's just a lot of bike and a very attractive price that somehow in 2024 did not go up. So kudos to Lectric for pulling that off without raising the price. I'm always pleased to see that. Now, if I'm being completely honest and even a little bit picky, I would say I'd like to see some small improvements made. Personally, I'd like to see more than one frame size and more than 2 colors. Again, that's me being a little picky. And then I'd also like, on a bike that's advertised for off-road riding or versatile EMTB style stuff, to just have a clutched derailleur. That way, when you're off-road, going over big drops or jumps, or maybe not that extreme, but maybe if you're just going off really rough terrain, you're not always hearing a chain slap, which I did hear a little bit of on the Media Day event when I was riding off-road. But again, I can't really complain because they really bumped this bike up. And when I compared it against a lot of other bikes in its class, other fat tires, it's really a tremendous amount of bike. that is even better now at one of the best price points out there. So if you're in the market for a fat tire e-bike and considering something maybe from Lectric, or you didn't know about them and you want to check them out, this is definitely a bike I would say to put on your short list to give a look. It's definitely a big improvement over the 1.0. I enjoyed riding it. Thank you for Lectric for bringing us out. If I missed anything, let me know down in the comments, or if you have any questions, let me know. I will relay them to Lectric and see what their response is, and I will post them personally for you guys to read on. And until the next review comes out, we'll see you guys out on the trail.